Hi, thank you for having me. It's really lovely to be here. It's really beautiful. It's put me in a very relaxed Zen mood. I need to wake up a little bit actually. It's beautiful that what you do here. So thank you for including me in it. Just wanted to correct something that was said. The book that I wrote actually was not written 17 years ago. It was written in 2016. So there was just a little misunderstanding, but I'll explain how that came about. Do you want me to start talking now? Is everybody ready? Yeah. Yeah, I'm originally from England. I've always been a painter, and I actually started off as a muralist in London. And my personal paintings kind of came about after a very, well, actually just as my first marriage was breaking down. There was, I guess you can call it a calling. It was really like a whisper, a persistent whisper to paint the essence of woman. And I was getting this persistent whisper and urge, like I said, as my marriage was breaking down. And looking back on it now, I see that there was obviously a bigger meaning for me, a bigger purpose for me that I didn't really realize I was going to be going through. I started painting a chakra series called the Goddess Chakra Series because I started working with my chakras. I started trying to heal myself through a lot of pain, emotional pain that I was going through my divorce. Through the chakras. And so I started this series of paintings. This was the first series. Before that, I hadn't really painted any personal paintings at all. I had just been doing murals and decorative work for other people. And I painted the chakra series as my marriage ended. And with that, I received an enormous amount of information, intuitive information. And I had always been intuitive, and I had always been a little weird. But I think I kind of pushed it to the side and got on with sort of life and motherhood and moving around the world and living in different countries. I really wasn't focused on that. But sometimes, and I'm sure many of you will also relate, that things break open when we are going through a trauma or a crisis. And gifts are often accelerated and come to light when one is broken down. And I think that really is what happened with me as I broke down. My gifts, my painting gifts and my intuitive gifts kind of came to the forefront, although I didn't really understand it at the time. So I started teaching about chakras, chakra healing at that time. This was back in 2009, 2010, and I really had no training. I didn't really, I had nothing behind me really, other than what I was receiving intuitively and through my paintings. And that then led me to the next series, which was the Sacred Feminine series. And at the time, I was aware that there was a sort of a quiet goddessy movement going on in the background of the spiritual world, and but I really wasn't part of it. I just was receiving information all the time at this point. And it was a little overwhelming. The Sacred Feminine series took me about 6 years to paint, 6 to 7 years to paint. And I was told from the beginning that there would only be 13. And that they would be in a specific order. And I was only given 3 at a time. So I didn't know, what the 13 was going to be. I only knew what the next 3 were going to be. I'm a slow painter. I paint with a lot of detail too. And I was bringing up my kids on my own. I was traveling and doing a lot of shows. I was trying to sell my work and my prints, and I had made products and stuff. So it was a very busy and difficult and it was an uncomfortable 6 years. And I was very, very glad to be done with it. But when I was done with it and when I had finished it, the last painting was Grandmother Spider. I had acquired an enormous amount of information as I'd gone through all of these channelings and all of these paintings. And I remember one day I had written out all these notes and I had written out all this information. I put it all on my dining room table. And I realized that it was a journey and it was a lesson back to self-love. And that the sacred feminine that I had been so compelled to tap into and to channel and to paint and to teach about was the vehicle for that journey. And so I realized that it was a book. And that's when I compiled all the information that I had gathered, including the paintings, and created the book, which is Self-Love Through the Sacred Feminine. And that was in 2016. And that got picked up by a publisher in 2019. So that's the story of the book and the story of the Sacred Feminine series. But my work, right from the beginning, from the chakra series up until now, really has been just a progression of listening to the calling, really. Like most artists, most artists have a calling and a whisper, and if they're aware enough, they'll follow it, which is what I did. I now am on another series. I'm on a Zodiac series, and I don't channel my paintings in the same way that I did the Sacred Feminine series, and I'm quite relieved about that, because it was difficult. And I do feel like with each painting that I painted, there was some kind of initiation for me, or a lesson that I had to go through, a growth spurt that was very uncomfortable. Looking back, at that time, it was a lonely 6-7 years. But the paintings have, and the teachings that are actually in the book have helped many people. And so, now I can look back at that now and I can say, it was all worth it. At the time, it didn't feel like it at all. I now am, working on other stuff that is a little lighter. I found that this body of work slotted into this sacred feminine, divine feminine / goddess movement that was building that I didn't really realize, that I didn't even know I was part of, and then suddenly realized I was in the middle of it. And I'm sure that there are other artists or writers out there that have also found themselves in this situation where they're being called to participate in a movement that's much, much bigger than them. I personally, I don't, I'm not affiliated with any religious or spiritual movement. I don't. Yes, I'm not affiliated with anything. I was brought up in a Jewish house, very traditional Jewish household in England. Very traditional, much more traditional, I think, than Jewish families in the States. And for me, I have a lot of, and maybe this resonates with a lot of you, I have a lot of truths that I resonate with. So for me, it's hard to slot myself into one particular kind of group. I know, a lot of my people who have followed my work for many years are very attuned and resonate very, very strongly with the sacred feminine. And I would say that it's not so much that I do, it's that I understand its relevance at this time. Yet I don't attach myself to it, if that makes sense. And that's been an interesting realization for me, because I have not really been able to completely, like other artists, like myself, connect properly with their audience in a way where what their audience believes and does and practices is what I do. So there has been a feeling of being disconnected a little bit from my own work. Almost my work is something that I needed to do, and I've done it, and now I detach from it, if that makes sense. I don't know if there's any questions about that for any of you so far. No, I wanted to touch on the butterfly. You mentioned the butterfly, that there's a butterfly on every painting, which there is. And that is symbolic of, but it's personal, it's very personal to me. But the butterfly for me in my life is the presence of spirit. Mm-hmm. It is also about transformation and evolution, one's own growth and evolution and transformation. But for me, it is really about the presence of spirit. And in all of the 13 paintings, you'll see butterflies, but some will just have one, and some will have many. So I just wanted to explain that. I didn't realize that obviously that was on your logo too. Which is I did want to talk about, I know Ken wanted me to talk about these 3 paintings. Yeshua the Nazarene, I did 3 paintings of him in 2014 during the summer of the Gaza war. And he wasn't the first sacred masculine that I had painted. I had painted Merlin before, I believe. This was also a persistent whisper, and a very uncomfortable one for me, not knowing very much about Jesus growing up, not really being familiar or feeling really it was in my realm, as it were. And so the idea of painting him felt uncomfortable and almost embarrassing, if that makes any sense at all. But I had spent most of my childhood every summer in Israel. So I have family that live there. So I know Israel very, very well. It was at the time, you know, growing up, it was my second home. And I had not been back for, I haven't been back for a very long time. But during that particular war, I mean, of course, there's been many, it was particularly excruciatingly uncomfortable for me. And I couldn't understand why. And it was, I remember it was bothering me every minute of every day. Mm. And at the same time, I was, you know, getting these persistent messages, persistent, repetitive, encouraging whispers saying that I needed to paint him. And I was very resistant. And I do remember one day like crying about it because it was very uncomfortable. It's just very uncomfortable. Anyway, the story of how I came about that is probably a bit too long for here, but I did start to paint him, and I realized that the uncomfortableness that I was feeling about what was going on in Israel at the time was his uncomfortableness, that not his uncomfortableness now, but an uncomfortableness that I was receiving of a time in his life. There was a parallel to what I was feeling with regards to what was going on in the present day, to what he was feeling in his day. And that was a sense of understanding too much. And let me explain that. Sometimes when you sit on the fence, you can see both sides of one side of the fence and you can see the other side of the fence. And I think people think when one sits on the fence, you kind of cop out, like you don't choose a side. Mm-hmm. Incredibly uncomfortable place to sit because you understand both, you can see both sides from a higher perspective really, really, really well, and understand them really, really well. And it kind of leaves you in a paralysis. Mm-hmm. And that paralysis, that uncomfortableness is what I was feeling and what I was receiving from him. And when you see the paintings, which I think you're going to see them soon, you might pick that up in the painting. And I did ask, you know, why did I need to know that about him? Mm-hmm. The message that his humanness was at times excruciating. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to share that with you before you see the paintings. You know, after I painted them, it was a great relief to be done. I was very scared to show them to the world, but they were beautifully received, thank goodness. Yeah, I don't know if anybody has any questions about that, or whether you want to see the paintings first. Or
I think